Hello guys, welcome back. Now, throughout my career, whether running the business or before running Relab as well, one of the most common questions that I get pretty much all the time is how much does it cost to build a website? And this is a topic that I've kind of touched here and there throughout the previous episodes of the vlog, but I'd like to talk to you specifically today about my mindset on how to charge for a website project today in the 2019. Okay, hope you find it useful and hopefully it makes sense to you. So as a freelancer, a website designer, a website developer, perhaps you get this question all the time. I'm pretty sure people would come up to you and say, how much does it cost to build a website? Now that's a very complicated question because there's so many angles to it, right? And it depends on who you're asking and the scope and all of that stuff that I'm assuming that we all know. A website project cost you from, I don't know, it could range from $500 to maybe $500,000. So there's so many different variants to it, and there's so many different components to it that would affect the cost of the website. But essentially, if you go to a website like Fiverr.com or Upwork, then you'll get a set of range of prices. Even that could vary as well. Or if you go to a freelancer, or if you go to an intern as well, that could change. Or if you go to an agency, that will change. Now, agencies themselves have different tiers and different levels and different markets. So I don't think there's actually a specific answer to how much a website will cost, because then the follow-up questions would be pretty complicated, right? And that's why most agencies would do some discovery work and all of this analysis work prior to actually quoting for a job. So in this episode today, I'd like to share with you a recent methodology or a mindset that I've tried to embed into myself and what we do here in Relab. Essentially, what you're trying to do is to price the client, not the project. So what does that mean? You'll have to look at, the scale of the client itself and the project that they've approached you for. And then from there make certain calculations. But before I get into the details of that, the reason why I think it's better is then you try to price based on the value. Now, in a previous vlog episode, I've already spoken about the money token business, and we'll provide you some links about that because this somehow ties into that. So I think pricing a project based on the value is the best thing to do. And there are different ways of measuring what the value of a certain product is. So if we're talking about a website, there are different ways of measuring how much or what the value is of a certain website, depending on the client's, stage at the time. If it's a startup, then it's a startup. The value will be based on a startup client. If it was an enterprise client, then it'll be based on an enterprise client, and that could range so differently. The differentiation would be really, really big. And so I think that's one thing that I'd like to mention. It's best for you to charge the project based on the client, not the time that you would spend on the project, okay? Another common way that people would charge is based on the hour, and that's very common in our industry. So you would kind of like estimate and calculate how much time, hours, day, or whatever it is, like a daily rate or an hourly rate that you would take or you would invest in for you to be able to produce the project for the client, and then kind of go from there. But you're charging on time, which I find is a bit of a flawed system over time, because then your pay is kind of dependent on how much time you spend. That almost feels like I have to spend more time for me to get paid more. If I'm spending less time in what I'm doing because I'm so good at it, or because I'm a specialist in it that it takes me less time to do, I'm getting punished by it because I'm getting paid less. So hopefully that makes sense. And because of that mindset, and I guess it doesn't really work, and it's not fair for the clients themselves as well. If you charge based on the hour and then you're trying to accumulate hours, and then there's more revisions, you're trying to add more and more hours, the more you're being too calculative on the hours, the worse the relationship gets. And that's a very common thing that happens across agency levels, and I've been in that position before as well, and it's not fun. So a simple way to look at this, my advice, is to look at the client and then look at yourself, and then to try to compare whether you guys are on par or not, whether you're the right fit for the project or not. I'll give you one example. So let's say there's a startup website for the purposes of this video, a startup client who would come up to you and say, hey, look, we have no funding, but we need a website done. It's an e-commerce website. We need to sell our products online. How much does it cost for you to build that, design and build that? So my response around budgeting and pricing would be, well, how much budget do you have in mind? And from there, we'll be able to work it out, and we'll find out very quickly whether we're the right fit for you or not. And if it's not right, then I might be able to help with recommending other people who might be the right one for you. Oftentimes, clients don't understand what the differences are between different web designers or web developers and the different tiers around it. So I feel like it's our responsibility to kind of guide them through that and make it a good experience for them to be able to achieve that website that they want. But I understand most of you will say, oh, but Alvin, no one's going to talk about budget, and no one's going to tell me how much money they have or they want to spend, which is fine. And so the next step that I would do is to kind of just throw a number out of it based on my experience. So let's say for a startup website, you only need, say, 5-6 pages. Typically, our company or our agency would charge, throw in a number, right? Typically, we'll charge, based on my experience, I don't know, 50 grand, for example. Or if you're a freelancer, or if you're a smaller business, where your project ranges or your minimum level of engagement is, say, about $10,000, and you go, typically it'll be about $10,000. How do you feel about that? So really what you're trying to get out of this conversation is just a reaction. You're just trying to get a reaction on how much they're willing to spend or what is too expensive for them. So you'll get different kinds of reactions. Someone would go, $10,000, oh my God, like I won't have that amount of money. Then you know that it's too expensive for them. Some people might go, okay, that sounds fair. Then you kind of know where they sit. So what you're trying to get is really just a reaction, a genuine one. And this is where your skills of trying to read people is important. So once you get that reaction, what I would do is say, okay, if $10,000 sounds about right, then I'll be able to send you a proposal based on that. That's where you get into the proposal, but at least you're minimizing your risk to spend without having to spend too much time to guesstimate and get a certain indication. Some people might go to you and say, $10,000, I think that's a bit on the higher end for us. And then you can say, well, how much would work better for you? And then maybe he or she would come and say, how about, I think $7.5 grand might be better for us. And then you said, okay, well, if you feel and you can justify that you could work with that budget for the scope that they want, then you could counter that and say, hey, look, I think maybe I can do something about it. Let me just process this for a second. I'll get back to you. Remind yourself as well that you don't have to come up with a certain decision straight away. You can always process it. So take your time to step back. Let them know that you're thinking about it. I think that's going to make a big difference from their perspective as well, because then you actually care about it and genuinely think about it, though. So that's where you need to justify whether, on top of the cost that I'm going to spend, is this the right amount? What are the terms that I need to do? If I'm trying to compromise on the cost, what are the risks that I'm going to take out of my project so it will work out better for me as well? Okay, but what you're trying to find is a win-win situation. In negotiation, I've learned when you get into a win-lose situation, it's not very sustainable for the long run. It has to be a win-win situation that it works best for both parties, that they're getting in a transaction, I'm getting what I want and the client is getting what they want, and we both get the value out of it. Okay. So that's my 2 cents on how to charge a website. I know it's a very complex one, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop in a comment or send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to help you with it. But just keep in mind that there's no, there's many ways to skin this whole thing. It depends on the client, essentially, in your capabilities, and then you somehow need to match it. And if it doesn't match, then it's completely fine at all, because there's always a market for everyone. Okay? Hope you find that useful, and I'll see you in the next one.